got some work to do now.
Happy Jack says it's time.
All night in a cake made of strawberry.
Did you like today's intro bumper? Y'all give it up. Miss Sydney makes those, and she does an amazing job with it. So as you guys saw tonight, we are continuing on with the Honor Gen series, and we're in part 3. We are going to be doing Gen X tonight. How does Gen X show honor? How does it receive honor? What does that mean? Because we know that God prizes honor. We know that God wants us to be showing honor in the body of Christ. So tonight, I want you guys to give it up for our panelists that I'm going to invite to join me on the Gen X panel. We have Mr. Rich Loomis and Miss Sarah Makinson. Come on down. Hi, guys. Hello, hello. Welcome, welcome. All right, guys. Well, what we're going to do, as you noticed, many of you have been complimenting me on my hair and my shirt. And the funny thing is, whenever I've had to dress up like my generation, your generation genuinely likes my generation's old style, which I think is so cool. So yeah, I see a lot of you guys nodding. But no, I don't normally crimp my hair. This was a thing though back when I was a kid. And MTV literally came out 1980, 1981, literally the year that we were all kind of born. So it technically is a X-lineal thing, and we're gonna define X-lineal before we get into our panel. There is a small subsection of Gen X and millennial that kind of cross with each other. So people that are born in 1980 to 1984 are known as X-lineals. They're a little bit of both because they resonate with Gen X like we do, but they know a lot about millennial because they technically are growing up in millennial as well. So they know the best of both worlds. So right now we're going to take a minute. All three of us are going to share just a little bit about what it was like to grow up as a young Gen Xer, because we're all at the very end of the Gen X generation. What was times like for you guys as a kid? What do you remember it being like culturally, in your family dynamic and in what you saw with all your friends' family dynamics? So Rich, do you want to kind of kick that off?
Sure. So yes, I'm a 1980, so I am right there on the fringe. I am the last year, I guess you could say, of Gen X. So I totally agree. Resonate with a lot of stuff that Gen X would relate to, and then the fringe millennial. So maybe not so much on the technology side as the millennial got further into the millennial reign, but do understand it. And so I know we'll talk about that a lot tonight. But growing up, I would say for all of us, very different childhood or upbringing than what it is today. Some ways good, some ways maybe not so good. But I would say, growing up in Central Florida, it felt like when I was growing up, everyone was moving to Florida, right? So there was this big boom of population, and Central Florida almost became like a melting pot of people from the north or all different. So like everyone was kind of moving to this area. There was a lot of jobs that were being created during that time because of the advances in technology and all those kind of things. So my family upbringing was, I would say, pretty normal. We didn't have cell phones or anything like that. So, growing up, we would ride our bikes to places, and school was a really big part of what we did. That's where we saw our friends for the most part. And then your closest friends probably lived on your street or in your neighborhood or close by. So I just remember it being way different than what it is today. And in some ways, I would say that was a better thing. Things were definitely a lot safer, I guess you can say. There was no social media or all that kind of stuff going on. And then we didn't have a lot of access to what was happening in the world, right? What was happening in overseas or maybe in a different state, you would learn that from your parents. Your parents would kind of fill you in and tell you, this is what you should worry about and this is what you shouldn't, which is much different than what you guys deal with. You get to form your own opinion because it's right in front of you all the time.
So Sarah, tell us a little bit about your experience.
Okay. Hello.
Swap me.
Hold on. Okay. We're good? Okay. So my experience is probably going to be a bit different from theirs because I come from a blended family, which is actually pretty common in that time period because of the rate of divorce that happened beforehand. So, and that's actually even going to tie into what Mr. Mick is probably going to talk about when he gets up here, is because a lot of things changed in the 60s and the 70s, and it kind of affected all of us. So I came from a family where my mom had me and my older brother Josh. I don't know if any of you have been through the kids, but my brother Josh, he teaches over there on Sunday mornings. He's my oldest brother. And then my stepdad had my two older brothers of his own. And then my parents got married, and then they had my brother. And so I have a little brother, me, and then 3 older brothers. And so the dynamic was a little bit different for me because for me and my little brother, we always had my mom and my dad. And my dad, like, he's my stepdad, but he's been my dad since I was, like, a baby. So I think of him as my dad. I don't really know my real father. So I had, and my brother had, the experience of having 2 parents in the home, but my 3 older brothers did not. So I got to see, growing up, what that did to affect how they thought about themselves, how they viewed my parents. 2 of my brothers would go back and forth between their biological mom and then our house. So it was interesting to kind of look in as kids who felt safe because my parents were together, but to see my brothers who felt like I saw how that affected them growing up. And but that was a big thing that I saw even in my friends. I had a lot of friends who had either a similar experience to me, or they had only their mom. Some people only had their dad. And just how that kind of shaped us growing up. And then another thing that was common amongst us too was that because my parents, same thing, moved here in the 80s, they needed to both have a job. And so you were either in daycare, or when you got old enough, you became what they call a latchkey kid. So you had your key, and you went in your house, and you were just on your own. So if you needed to do something, like you're hungry, you made your own food. You did everything for yourself. And it kind of felt like we had to grow up a little bit, but at the same time, I still felt like a kid because we did all the kid stuff, go out, ride your bike. I mean, we'd come home when the street lights came on, come home covered in dirt because we were playing where we weren't supposed to, scratches all over us. I mean, I had brothers, so I didn't do the typical girl stuff. We played war, and in building, they were building houses in our neighborhood because it was new, and we would go into these houses because nobody was there on the weekends, and we would walk across they had they were gonna have a balcony at some point. We would just walk across, but our parents never wondered where we were. They they'll come home eventually, and we come home with scrapes and bruises and the whole thing. And it was just a different time, and whether for good or for bad.
I agree, and I moved here when I was 6, guys. So I moved here around kind of the same time frame of what I heard him talking about. It was a high time of development. Neighborhoods were new. There was a lot of construction going on. And yeah, let me tell you, my generation was very much a largely unsupervised generation. Would you agree, guys? Okay, so parents were there, but not there. They were there, but way in the background if they were there. But a lot of times you had a babysitter, or you just had your oldest sibling, or if you were like me, you were the oldest sibling. And even at a really young age, you were in charge. And so a lot of times there was a lot of downtime, a lot of freedom. And we were a generation that was different than I think generations after. So your generation and millennial, in the sense that our parents didn't really, I don't know if they just didn't think to do this. I don't know if economically they didn't have the funds as your generation's parents did, but we were not overly scheduled. So a big difference is I know with you guys, I see how a lot of you are in so many extracurricular activities. Like raise your hand if you have more than one extracurricular activity that you do. This is a sport, an activity, something that your parents pay for you to do, lessons, music. All right, a lot of y'all, right? That was not the case. Like our generation, maybe we'd have one that we would do for like a season, but a lot of times we just had what's called downtime. And so because of this, what we did is our generation would just go outside a lot. We didn't want to be in our house. We were bored and we were tired of just being there with our siblings. So a lot of our activities took us out. I believe our generation was highly explorative. Would you guys agree with that? Like, we were all about climbing trees and finding the one neighbor that had a pool and that was my house growing up. So we had tons of kids that just came over to go swimming all day, every day. My mom was like the only stay-at-home mom in the whole neighborhood. So we were slightly supervised more than others. But it was just kind of like, you didn't have this, right? So what you had to do, it was a process, y'all. Like, for you, when you want to hang out with your friends, you pick up your phone and what do? You text, right? Hey, what are you doing? Or WYD, right? Or you're like, you go on social media. Hey, like, what's up? What are you doing, right? We didn't have this. So if I wanted to play with Miss Sarah, I had to go to, like, if my mom was there. Mom, can I go out and play? Yeah, go ahead and go out and play. I'd grab my bike, because everybody had bikes, okay? This was your main transportation because 9 times out of 10, your parents didn't drive you anywhere. And 10 times out of 10, there was no Uber, okay? Didn't exist. So unless you were gonna call like a taxi cab, which was super expensive and nobody did that, you got on your bike, right? And when I say get on your bike, I don't mean like you just ride around your neighborhood. I'm talking like Miss Sarah's neighborhood could have been miles from mine. She could have been like 5 or 6 neighborhoods away. I would have rode my bike on the main roads, on the sidewalks, get to her house dripping in sweat. I don't even know if she's home. I just took a risk because I had no way to contact her. And I knock on the door. Her mom or dad, if they're there, will answer. If not, it's her older brother. Can Sarah come out and play? Sarah, you home? And then she'd run downstairs and come out and play. And then we would just go on our bikes wherever we felt like going. And 9 times out of 10, it would be, let's go get Rich. Let's go ride to his neighborhood now. So now we're riding all the way to his neighborhood. Can Rich come out and play? No, Rich isn't home. Oh man, we just rode over here for nothing. Who lives in this neighborhood besides Rich? Does anybody? Did you guys ever do skateboarding?
Yeah, but I'm like super tall and not athletic, so it didn't last long. But to your point though, and we lived in like a coastal area pretty much, like near New Smyrna Beach where I grew up. So like skateboarding and surfing was huge when we were growing up and going to the beach. But to your point, these are outside activities and that's what we had to do, but we enjoyed them. Like it was the thing to go do. But yes, I can remember skateboarding and surfing highly unsupervised and just make sure you paddle parallel to the shore. Like they give you all the, but no one's watching, so just come home safely type thing, for sure. Right. Yeah.
What about, so we used to skateboard, and because I didn't really know how to skateboard and I was like a girly girl, I had a pink skateboard. My brothers had like cool guy skateboards. And I would just like be on my skateboard on my knee and then like use my other leg to like scoot me around, right? But I was still on one. We also used to do, again, we didn't have anything high tech or fancy. I think this was a good thing about our generation. You guys actually have high tech and fancy. Like if you're gonna do something, you guys go all out with the technology, or you go all out, like if you're gonna play like some kind of sport, you're gonna go to like the RDV Sportsplex. You're gonna have like a membership, right? I remember wanting, like my brothers and the neighborhood kids, we used to wanna actually play like hockey or like soccer or whatever, but we didn't really have like an actual way to get to a field because it was way too far beyond a bike. So we would literally just like take chalk, sidewalk chalk, and like draw like bases or goals or like whatever we had to all around to like actually play this game. And I don't know, do you guys remember Elimination Frisbee? Do you remember that game? There was a game that was really popular, like right here in this little area called Elimination Frisbee, where basically you had a Frisbee and it was not soft, it was the hard Frisbee. But the whole idea was almost like dodgeball. You had to like hit people with the Frisbee to get them out. So when Miss Sarah says you came home with scrapes and cuts and bruises, you came home with scrapes and cuts and bruises because the games we played were not gentle. And I'm sure like, I don't know, I used to climb trees a lot. You would fall, you would bump your head. And I'll tell you what, there was always one mom in the neighborhood. Again, my mom was the one mom that stayed home. That was like the neighborhood nurse, okay? She literally, if any kid in the neighborhood fell and broke their arm, their leg, their whatever, and was crying, that one mom would come running out to whoever's child it was and would take them to the ER to get x-ray, whatever. I mean, because really, so many parents were working. Both parents had jobs. And if there was a teenage babysitter, they didn't always know what to do. So this was kind of like the era of what we grew up in. And you saw a lot of the things on the screen. It was also a really big generation of public service announcements. You guys know what PSAs are, right? Everyone know? This is where like some governing authority decides what's morally right and what's good and decides to make a marketing campaign using cartoon characters or something to explain what it is.
G.I. Joe, they decided G.I. Joe. Okay. So when we were kids, cartoons were there to sell toys. So they had like a thin plot and they just tried to show you like the coolest thing that was out there and then you could go to the store and buy it. So G.I. Joe was huge. And so because I was the only girl in the house, there was no Barbie, My Little Pony, or even She-Ra, a whole different thing. But I had to watch Thundercats, Voltron, and G.I. Joe all the time. But actually, it was pretty good. But every time at the end of the G.I. Joe episode, they'd give you this really cheesy PSA. It was like, don't touch down power lines. I don't know if they thought we were unintelligent or what, but you better help somebody after drowning in the pool. Just silly things like that. And it would be like the G.I. Joes would tell you. And at the end, they would like, what was the thing that the tag they would say at the end?
They would say,
now you know.
And knowing is half the battle. G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
They would literally do that every single time. So you have this stuff in your brain forever till you're in your 40s or beyond that. So public service announcements through cartoons were like the way to that the governing authorities of the world could get to you because they knew if they did it enough, you would remember it. So we had Smokey the Bear for forest fires. We had McGruff the crime dog. I'm telling you, there was a cartoon character for everything, guys.
And McGruff would come to your school.
Yes.
Right? So he would come to your school and tell you what you saw and the same thing over and over. But yeah, McGruff would show up and you knew exactly. He would even sign autographs, which I thought was great. Yeah, we get McGruff's autograph.
So we wanted to give you guys a little taste of what the generation was like. So now we want to transition into, okay, we know that you guys weren't supervised very much. We know you were very independent. We know you didn't have a lot of technology. You had you saw that glass box with a phone with a cord in there? Yeah, we had pay phones. We didn't have half the things you guys had. We had to be really resourceful, really innovative, really creative, really imaginative. We're going to transition into what does that mean for how it shapes us and how we how we show honor. So, all right, different generations, we mentioned this in the other parts, have different purposes and different ways of expressing honor. Proverbs 20:29 tells us that both older and younger generations deserve honor for different reasons. One is for wisdom and one is for strength. So I want you guys, if you have a Bible, turn with me to Proverbs 20:29 because there's nothing like actually reading what it says. All right, I'm in the NIV version, the New International Version. It doesn't matter what you have though. All right, so Proverbs 20:29 says the glory of young men is their strength. Gray hair, the splendor of the old. Gray hair is symbolic for wisdom, okay, in the Bible. Many times when you read that, that's what that symbolizes. But it's saying that the glory of young men is their strength, their physical strength, right? So I'm going to ask our panel, what strengths do you think Gen X has to offer the body of Christ unique from the other generations?
You want me to go first? So I wrote some of these down. I wrote down 3 strengths that I believe my generation, our generation has, that I think other generations before us have and had, but maybe Gen Y and further don't, or not as prevalent, I guess you can say. The first, I think, I feel like our generation, Gen X, is still a coachable generation. They very much, I can think about myself, and you guys may be able to say the same. And by the way, all this is personal experience. We all grew up in different homes and different environments, so the situation may be different, but I felt like our generation still would want to be taught, and they still would want the older generation to show them things, how to cut the grass, how to hang a picture on the wall, how to live life, how to make good choices, how to apply for college, where I think the generations after us, not that they didn't want to know, but they just want to figure it out on their own, or felt like they didn't need someone to show them. And I still feel like that was a great quality of Gen X, where we very much wanted to be coached and willing to be coached. And I wouldn't say Gen Y is rebellious, but you definitely could see rebellion starting to creep in, even in our generation towards the end, I would say. The second thing I put is one thing that our generation still clinged onto that is very much slipping in culture today is just nuclear family, right? So it still existed where mom and dad were together. Now, you mentioned divorce. That really came in our generation. I think about our parents' generation. Was divorce prevalent? Yeah, it was, but not like Gen X, right? And certainly not like it is today. And that's important because the nuclear family, things came along with that, like family values and core values about sitting at the dinner table and having dinner together, undistracted, about going to church together. There's so much things that happen in a good way that come from a nuclear family that over time and through culture, those things slip away. And that obviously changes a few things. And then the third thing I put down was one thing I think Gen X, we probably don't get credit for this, but we should, is we are more open-minded than people give us credit for, right? Because we are on that verge of, the generation before us, the boomers, where it was very structured, rigid. That's also a generation of a lot of Vietnam War, and they've seen a lot happen in their life, where our generation, we carry a lot of that core value stuff forward, but we're also more open-minded because of the advances in technology and media and social media. I mean, we didn't really get into it, but we're the generation of reality TV. We're the generation of MTV. We're the generation of video games were created in our generation, by the way, so you guys can't take credit for all that. That happened in our generation, right?
We just had a joystick.
Yeah, Sega Genesis and Nintendo, our generation started that. Give us credit for that. But I say all that to say, we are not as old and uncool as you think we are. We are very much with you, and we very much are. I guess the word I'm looking for is open-minded, but we were very adaptable to what was happening because we had to, and it was moving so quickly. And so I'm not saying the generations before us didn't have that, but I give our generation a lot of credit for that.
I would agree with that. Sarah, what'd you say?
I think we're kind of, so there's right now 3 generations that are kind of have adults in them. We're starting to see Gen Z has more adults in it, but I'm talking about solidly adults. You have you have the baby boomers, you have us, you have the millennials. So we're like the middle child, and the middle child gets ignored. And that's one thing I find about our generations, we kind of are ignored. Everybody, they don't cater to us in either direction. So you always hear, we have to get the younger generation, we have to get the millennials. We have to get, the next generation after that. Or they want to keep the baby boomers. But you don't hear a whole lot about us. You don't hear us being marketed to very much. But we're more consumers than most people. we have a very small generation because, once again, because of divorce and the advent of birth control. So birth control came about in the 70s. Another thing that came about was abortion. So there's a lot less of us than there is of our parents or of the people after us. So there isn't as many of us, so we kind of got overlooked. So we're like the middle child right now of the generations. And I think that's kind of good because we kind of aren't overly influenced by people. Like how Rich was saying, we're more open-minded because we kind of stand back and look at everybody else and go, like, what are you all doing? We have the older generation who wants everything to go back to the way it was and thinks the world's going to hell in a handbasket. And then we have the younger generation who thinks we're so progressive and free thinking. And we're just sitting here in the middle going, you're both wrong. But we don't really say a whole lot about it. We just go out and we do. And we tend to stay in our jobs. Whereas the millennials are bouncing from job to job, job. They're always looking for that next thing. If I stay here for too long, I might miss out on the next opportunity. Whereas we still see the value of the people that came before us who worked until retirement. So I think that we have something to bring to it, that we still are kind of that like hinge of that older generation that the millennials and the Gen Z maybe don't really understand. We do, because we were kind of given a lot of respect growing up because we did have to do a lot of things for ourselves. And our parents saw that we could do it. Instead of maybe the generations that came after where you maybe wanted to do it, but your parents swooped in and did it for you instead of letting you figure it out. So I think that brought a lot, helps us a little bit more to talk to both sides.
And I'll add something. So there's something unique about the Xlennials, that 1980 to 1984 group, right, which we fit in. The strength that I think we bring is we are kind of the best of both worlds in this sense. We grew up without technology for the most part. Our technology was pretty rough and crude, right? But we knew how to do things what's known as the analog way or the old school way or without technology. But then we were also, because we're the oldest Gen Xer, or the oldest millennials and the youngest Gen Xers, we also were able to really adapt quickly to the new technology because it was being introduced. We were the first to start learning it, to start adapting to it and adopting it. And so we know how to do both. We know how to be technologically savvy and how to run with new technology, but we also know how, if your technology fails, if the cloud disappeared one day, if something died, we know how to do it the old school way. There's ways that you can do it, and we would know how to do that. So I think that's one of our biggest strengths, is that we understand a lot of different methods for doing things. We're not so in a box. We are open-minded, to Mr. Rich's point. We can understand many different ways of doing something, where I think previous generations were kind of pigeonholed to one way. This is how we always do it. I think that's why we saw the baby boomers and beyond us as very rigid. It was just but why does it have to be done that way? What about this? And so we were kind of the explorers in that way. And a lot of the things that our generation was able to help get off the ground, your generations are perfecting now. Your generation has picked up and is taken to the next level, but it started kind of with our generation pioneering a lot of things. So I would say that's our strength. But I'm going to move on to our next scripture verse. So if you got your Bible, I want you to get to 1 Timothy 5, 1 and 2. And it says, in that scripture verse, we learn that we should encourage the older and younger generations equally by showing them both honor. I want to read it to you guys, so I'm going to flip over there to 1 Timothy chapter 5. So go there with me if you've got your Bible. All right. It says, do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. Exhort just means to encourage, to edify. It says, treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. All right, so the question I'm going to ask is, as a Gen Xer, have you felt encouraged and respected by the older generation, specifically the baby boomers? and the younger generations, Gen Y and Gen Z. And if you do feel like you've been encouraged and respected, share how. And if you don't feel that you've been encouraged, share why.
I think with my parents, it took time for me to understand that they were respecting me. I think that's one thing that I found was I had a really good relationship with my parents, and so not everybody has that. But it took me a little while to realize that I needed to grow up. And in growing up, one of the things was to understand that the things that they did, maybe they didn't do it the right way, or they didn't do it in a way that was always encouraging. But the reason that they were doing it, I started to appreciate more. And it could be because we were given so much freedom that it didn't always feel like they were micromanaging us and trying to make us into what they wanted us to be. So I think for me, I did realize that they were showing me respect through the fact and honor through they let me kind of make my own mistakes, but they also did not let that go unchallenged if I did. And so there was a bit of both. Like, you're going to make the mistake, but we're also going to be there with the consequence and to kind of help you with that, which I didn't always understand in the beginning. It seemed harsh to me, and I hate them. And if, you know, all the scenarios you put in your head as you're sitting in your room because you're grounded, they're going to be sorry one day they were so mean to me. But then, you know, realizing, no, they actually have my best interest. And then for the younger generation, I feel like with them, it's when they want to come and talk, because like we're not so far away from them that it's difficult, where like there's just this big gap between like the things that we experience. We experienced a lot of the same things that they did, but just with a different mindset. So I feel honored when they come to me and they're like, hey, can I talk to you about something? What do you think about this? Because I think that's so important. I always think of where you have Moses and you have Joshua, and Joshua is following Moses as he's going up the mountain. He doesn't get to go all the way to the top with and see God, but he gets to go like part of the way. And then he's the next person who, you know, carries on after the 40 years where they're wandering. He gets to carry on. And you notice, like, he doesn't do it different. He doesn't say, oh, I'm just going to wipe out whatever Moses did. He kind of refines it. So Moses sends out, I think, 12 people to go and scout. Well, Joshua sends 2, because he's like, 2 came back last time and they were truthful. I'm only going to send 2 this time. It's not because he thought Moses' way was wrong, but he's like, I'm going to refine it. I'm going to take what I saw before and I'm going to use that, but add my own thing to it. And so I think when younger people come to us and talk to us, it feels like, yes, we get to kind of carry on and take the mistakes that we've made and hopefully encourage you to make better choices. And so like that's how I feel.
That's good. Mr. Rich, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the question, like, do I feel like the older generation shows honor to us and us to them? The answer is yes. Like, I really feel like the boomer generation showed us honor and our generation showed them honor, because I felt like they felt like it was important to pass things on to us. So it came back to that coachability thing. For our generation, we still wanted to be taught, we still want to be learned, and the generation before us wanted to do those things. So like, I personally feel like that was very evident. So do I think that generation shows our generation honor? I think it's yes, because they valued what they were passing, and they felt like it was there wasn't a lot of like rebellion from our generation pushing back on that. The generation below us, Gen Y, do I think they show our generation honor? I really think it's a mixed bag, right? Like I really do, and I'm not trying to be like negative to Gen Y. Where I see this show up the most is like in the workforce, right? Because like in the corporate world, like I'm managing Gen Y, right? For the most part, or in the millennial generation too, right? So that's where I see it show up the most. That's why I say it's a mixed bag, because it really depends on how they were brought up and like their worldview, right? So those that have like, everyone has a worldview, whether you want to admit it or not. But if you have a biblical worldview, then you have a different like work ethic, is what I would say, right? And then if you have you mentioned jumping job to job, that's very much a secular worldview where you're just trying to get what you want, when you want, at the moment that you want it, right? And so I'm not going to say that Gen Y doesn't honor our generation. It's just very different. There's a lot less like coachability. The work ethic is definitely way different than our generation was. And that's really dependent on how they're bringing. But there's a lot of socioeconomic factors that play into that. The divorce rate was super high in our generation. So a lot of things are factors in that. But I would just say I have a hard time saying Gen Y like respects our generation. I would have a hard time jumping all the way to that conclusion.
So my answer might be a little bit different. And I don't know if this is just because of my unique calling, because for some reason Gen Y responds really well to me. So I feel like they've always respected me. But I think one thing I've seen that's different is our generation wanted to learn. So I 1,000% agree. We did. But whether it was because our parents were working a lot or because it was, many times a 2-income household or it was a divorced household or whatever it may be, they maybe just weren't there or they were exhausted when they were. So they didn't really have the time and or the patience to always teach that. Now our grandparents were a lot of the times would invest the time to tell us how things worked. But I remember by and large, and it wasn't so much my parents, but a lot of my friends' parents, they didn't want to take the time to answer any questions. In fact, it was seen as very disrespectful if you asked your parents, but why? Or how come? Oh, no. If they told you to do something, you didn't need to know why. And if you even dared to ask, you found out very quickly that was not right. Now, the difference I see is that I think because we experienced that by and large, a lot of my generation now as adults, whether we're parents or not, when it comes to younger people, I think we're a little more patient. I think we do spend more time explaining things and answering questions and personalizing things to help people process. Like, we want to see the younger generation set up for success, and we know that sometimes the best way to learn is through question asking and not just expecting them to just jump and do. I think older generations, we're used to seeing younger generations as almost like commodities, like a thing to use to help them get things done. Whereas we kind of view the younger generations less as that. It's not about you guys just doing stuff for us. We want you to understand the why behind it, because we want to set you up for success to be individuals and adults in your life as you grow. So I think it's a little bit different. Now, I'm not saying every adult in our generation was like that, but I saw a lot of pockets in many different. My parents weren't like that per se. My mom was much more explanatory. My father was not. But a lot of my friends, I saw their parents were just they weren't willing to really teach. They wanted you to just do. And because we had to figure stuff out on our own, we just had to learn by trial and error a lot of the time. And I think that's why sometimes our generation went overboard with yours or with the millennials and became the helicopter parent. So now it was, we're gonna hover around you and make sure you don't make mistakes and we're gonna do it for you. You can kind of see why the pendulum swung in the other direction. It didn't really hit like the happy medium in between. But it was, I believe, meant out of love. I just think it kind of didn't really help a lot of millennials, because then they became very me-focused and very, needing affirmation, insecure, things like that. And I think that was a result of having someone just always on top of them all the time and not giving them the freedom and the space to figure some things out or to make some mistakes every now and then. But in terms of honor, here's what I see. I see older generations tried to show us honor. They tried. I think they did. I think they wanted to. But I think a lot of times it wasn't always seen that way, because we were the type of I think a lot of kids are like this. We had questions. We wanted answers. We wanted to have the time. And by the lack of their time, it kind of felt like we didn't matter. We were forgotten, right? We were a forgotten generation, almost like, hey, they're just out playing somewhere. Hopefully they'll come home tonight. If not, then their dinner's going wrapped up in the refrigerator, and they could go heat that up later or make it themselves, With younger generations, I don't think it's that the younger generations, and I'm speaking about Y and X, I don't think it's that they aren't respectful. I think they don't understand what our generation needs to feel respected. So I'll give you guys a real example, and it's funny. When we had our Christmas party, okay, how many of you guys were at our Christmas party this year? Okay, quite a few of you were there. Okay, do you remember we played the game that Miss Veronica led, right? And she was at the front. She was calling out different instructions and different things and for different teams to buzz in, right? But in the excitement of the game, everybody was talking all at once. And Miss Veronica couldn't be heard. She kept having to try to scream to get attention. Hey, everybody, hey, everybody. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but all of our leaders at student ministry, they handled that so differently. And they handled it differently by generation. So I'm going to explain how I saw, because I was watching this. And that was almost the reason why this series is happening, because God used that to kind of start spurring some ideas within me. I noticed that Gen Z leaders, so, like Raya and Jordan, Sydney, all of those leaders, they weren't fazed at all. They did not seem bothered at all that everybody was talking. They were kind of just chill, when everybody's done, we'll hear Miss Veronica, Then I'm looking at the millennials, and that's kind of like Miss Elizabeth, and you can see she's oh, everybody needs to stop talking. But at the same time, she's not really overly trying to get everyone to stop. She's just kind of okay, let's see what happens. You have me and Miss Sarah and Mr. Rich, and we're definitely getting agitated, but we're trying real hard to keep our self-control and our cool, but we're kind of all right. Then you're seeing the baby boomer generation, and they're really not having it. They're really getting agitated. So why is this? Okay, real easy, we can go, because they're old and they're cranky. We're old and we're cranky. No, it's not because we're old and we're cranky. We just had a different generational experience. So like I said, in our generation, the older adults children were kind of seen and not heard. You were there, but you really didn't get to engage in adult conversations. You didn't get to vocalize a lot. You didn't get to ask a lot of questions. You were just told to do things, and you were expected to just do it right away. So we grew up with an expectation that if an adult is talking, you don't dare speak at the same time with your friends or in pockets. If we had a teacher teaching, everybody just had to be quiet. Okay, not saying that everybody followed that. There might have been 2 people that were the rebels that in the back of the class were talking, and they definitely got in trouble. But it wasn't everybody. So for us, that's what we learned was respect. And so when we're here and we see everybody's just talking over Miss Veronica, it was we're just going, do they not respect us? But we understand that your generation's different. You guys had a different kind of parent. You had parents that were more letting you be individuals, speak your mind, share your heart, let's ask the questions. It was some of you guys had parents that were more like friends than actual parents. So it was different, right? And so you didn't have the same fear of don't talk or speak when there's an adult talking. And so I had to kind of go, okay, this is not that your generation is trying to be disrespectful. You just had different upbringing, different generation by and far that expresses it in different ways. And that's why your leaders, your Gen Z leaders, were not worried that night. They were really chill about it because they get it, But it's different generations that respond in different ways. So I hope that kind of gives a little bit of a visual example of what we're talking about. But it's easy to just judge, right? It's easy. We could have easily just been these ungrateful students or these disrespectful, rude students. But that's not the case. And you guys could have judged us and said, they're just so old and cranky. They just don't get it. but you're not going to judge us either. You're going to go, wow, we didn't realize that that's what it was like for your generation, that you couldn't be, you just were seen and not necessarily heard, that you didn't get to really ask a lot of questions. You just had to do things all the time. And so when you understand these things, it makes it a little easier to understand how to honor each other in different ways as we know. So I'm going to move to another scripture, but it's still in the same book. So stay in 1 Timothy, stay in chapter 5, but I want you to just go over to verse 17, right? This is a verse that teaches us that elders who lead well deserve honor, and especially teachers and or pastors or preachers, because they're laboring for the faith, right? And that's a high and it's a difficult call. But the verse tells us that leaders deserve double honor, because it indicates that even those from older generations who don't lead, they still deserve it. So if you're not a leader, but you're an older generation, you deserve honor. If you are a leader and you're in an older generation, you deserve double honor. You have a higher calling. It's not necessarily like seen as transactional, but it's just given honor based on a life stage, right? Where you are in life. And we know the Bible refers to gray hair as wisdom. So I'm going to read this verse to you. This is verse 17. It says, the elders who direct the affairs of the church well are worthy of double honor, especially those whose work is in preaching and teaching, right? All right, so now I'm going to ask our panel. Do you guys think as Gen Xers collectively, like the whole generation from what you've seen of others and in pop culture and in media, do you think that Gen Xers honor older generations well and have modeled that appropriately to younger generations? Do you feel we were rebellious in any way? Like, where do you see that on the spectrum?
I think the older generation, boomer generation, modeled it extremely well to our generation. And I think our generation did the best they could, right? Like, again, a lot of things were changing. Culture began to erode our generation, and that has just carried forward to where it is today. And that shouldn't be a big surprise, but it is what it is. What I feel like has happened is there's been a big void of like leadership. So like the generation that my parents, there was just no question like who was the leader. And that could be in anything. Leader of your friend group, leader of your family, leader of the church, leader of the country. Leadership was a quality that was high value. It was something that was honored, and it was something that was passed on. And so like culture has definitely eroded that. And I think our generation did the best they could to uphold that with a lot of battles that were taking place. The other thing that I think the boomer generation had that we tried to carry forward is this idea of like contentment. So like our parents were content with what they had and what they could provide. And you know, just they were content with a movie night with the kids and eating popcorn. And that was good and wholesome. And that was exactly what they wanted. And our generation, I think we wanted to cling to that, but with the culture and like the consumer mindset that was coming at us so quickly because of TV and everything, and eventually when the phone came along, cell phone came along, we were just marketed to. So like those two things, contentment and leadership, I think were values that were greatly honored in the boomer generation. I think our generation did the best they could to hang on with that. And then hopefully we're passing that down to our kiddos. But I think they modeled it extremely well. We did the best we could and are still doing the best we can to model it to the younger generation. So I give them high marks, and I do give our generation high marks as well.
I think we're a little more subversive. I think the younger generations right now, they're very much, because of social media and the fact that you guys can just kind of like throw all your ideas out there. We didn't really have that. Like, if you're saying, if you want to go to your friend's house, you're biking a long way. If you want to call your friends on the phone, that phone was in the middle of the living room, the kitchen. Like later on, we got the cordless phones, so you had a little more freedom to go somewhere else. But still, it was the family phone, so you couldn't be on there for very long because maybe your parents need to call somebody. The internet was hooked into that line. So if they needed to use the internet, you couldn't be on the phone. It was, yeah. So there wasn't as much like where you could throw out your stuff to a bunch of people who would agree with you, like you guys have with social media. So we'd have to go to school and like talk about our parents behind their back, you know, and how much we hated them and how much we like thought that they were doing everything wrong. And I feel like that kind of continued into our adulthood, where we might not be saying anything, but we're certainly thinking it. And so we're looking at the generations around us, and we have our own thoughts about it, but maybe we're a little more passive aggressive in the way that we go about doing things. I find that, like, I feel like maybe we lead the boycotts a lot. That, like, we're just not going to buy this stuff, you know? Like, I'm going to vote with my dollar. I feel like that kind of came from our generation, where it's not so much we're going to, like, post something on social media, but we're just not going to buy your product anymore. And we're not going to make a big deal about it, most likely. So I do think that, yes, we respect the generation above us, but I think we're also not really great about it with you guys, because I think you pick up on a lot of things. You guys are very intuitive, and I think you see how we treat political leaders. I think you see how we treat bosses, how we look at maybe even the church. And I think you guys do pick up on that. And I feel like a lot of times we probably talk, I know I talk a lot to my husband about stuff, and I have to be very careful what I say and how I talk about that. And like the generations above us and the generations below us with him, because we're not always, you know, great about honoring the people above us when we think we know everything. We were like the generation of what they call the disaffected youth, where they hated authority. They thought, you know, grunge came out of there, like Marilyn Manson, like death metal, this idea that we're just going to tear everything down because you all just messed up. So there's still those people out there who kind of carry that kind of animosity. Sadly, it kind of went into the church, and unfortunately, the 90s church is very much known for its seeker-friendly. That's where it came from. It came from the 90s. It came from, we just want the numbers. We don't really care about how churched you are. Like, do you know the Bible? Are you going to, go be in a small group, but are you really being fed in that small group? They really didn't care. It was like, is it catchy? Is it bringing people in? Do you like the music? Do you like the lighting? Or are the seats comfortable? It was all about the entertainment experience. And unfortunately, that started in the 90s. And so it was kind of hard sometimes when it came to pastors to have that kind of respect level, because it kind of just felt like, well, I showed up and I did my thing for Sunday and now I go home. And so it's a lot better now. But it was, I think that made it really easy for us to be, like I said, very subversive in whether or not we were actually respecting the generation above us.
So I will agree with what Rich said, that I do think we had an example above us of a generation that knew how to show respect to older generations. The baby boomer generation, when you hear from Mr. Mick, when we do him on the next panel, I'm sure he's going to share about this, but we saw them always respecting older authority. It was like taking care of aging parents. It was yes, sir, yes, ma'am, you know, like no questions asked. They just did. But I will say, I don't know that our generation did as good of a job at respecting the older generations that we had. And part of the reason I think that was a little bit of the rebellion that Miss Sarah talked about that we heard with, you know, the pop culture, that definitely influenced, but that wasn't something that was totally new. Like every generation has some kind of pop culture that's trying to get people to go against the grain. I think what we felt was a lot of Gen X was kind of forgotten. A lot of Gen X was kind of, you're on your own. And while we got independence out of that, it almost felt like abandonment in a lot of ways. And so with that said, while Rich made a good point, in our minds, logically, we had clear delineations of who's the leader, who's the leader of your household, who's the leader of this, who's the leader of that. But did we really, like, we knew that was their title, we knew that was their role, and we knew how to play lip service to show that we respect, but it was superficial. In our hearts and in what we did behind the scenes, we kind of did our own thing, and we didn't always do the things we knew we were supposed to do or asked to do, because we knew there was a title of leader of who that person was, but we didn't always feel that they actually were present or there to be that leader in the way that we were hoping or wanting or needing. And so therefore, it manifested with a little bit of that rebellious side, a little bit of that, I'm just gonna do it my way, no one cares, no one's noticing, no one's around, it's just me, I'll figure it out. So it was a lot harder. I think now your generation is starting to see more invested adults. I think you're starting to see more, not saying everybody has the same experience, but I think you're seeing more adults that are willing to listen and talk and invest in who you are uniquely and help you with your goals and your dreams and your ideas and your relationships, right? I don't know how many of you have had an adult. I can say, forget everybody outside of here. If you're here, you've had at least one of us adults want to hear about your life. What's going on with your friends in your circle, or your boyfriend or girlfriend or your whatever. That was, I don't know about you guys, but that was not super common in our generation. Like, you may have been lucky to have a grandparent and or a parent that would do that periodically. But that wasn't necessarily the norm in our generation, to have close relationships where you could talk to your parents on the regular, on the daily, about anything and everything. A lot of things were, again, transactional. Parents saying, do this, do that, get your homework done. Did you do your chores? You're grounded. And that was it. There really wasn't a whole lot of, hey, what's going on in your life? You know, hey, how are you doing with your friends? How can I help you through your breakup? Like, it wasn't really discussed. So again, intellectually, logically, you knew maybe dad's the leader of our house, but you didn't respect him all the time because he wasn't emotionally there. You know, where I do see, I think that things have shifted a little bit, maybe not for everybody, but by and large, I think more adults are starting to realize it's important to be investing in the next generation, and they're trying their best to start being more fully present. They might have gone a little too far with the helicopter parent. Now they're like so up in your face, you're like, oh my gosh, give me some breathing room. But you're starting to see a little more of a shift back in that direction. So, yeah. I would say that we saw the example of it. We did the best we could given the circumstances of how we grew up, but was it perfect? No, it could have been a lot better. And that's something that I think as adults now, we're trying to recognize how to do a better job with our aging parents, an aging generation of baby boomers, that they didn't purposely try to neglect us. That wasn't their goal. Many of them were dealing with having two-income household or a divorce or things that as children we just couldn't even understand at that time, but we took it personal. And so now we understand the bigger picture, and we're working to do a better job collectively. We have one more scripture verse that I want to go over before we end tonight. We're going to do it real quick, and then we're going to break into mentor huddles. But the verse, if you guys have your Bibles, in Job, so this is back in the Old Testament, so flip over to Job chapter 32. And we're going to be at verse 7, Job 32:7. All right, I'm going to read that to you guys. And I'm going to give you a little context. So just before I read that verse, Elihu is who's actually speaking. And Elihu was a younger man. So he's in a group of older gentlemen. And he's like the youngest. We don't really know how old he is. Maybe he's in his 20s, and these older gentlemen could be in their 40s or 50s. We're not really sure, but we just know that he's like a generation behind the older gentleman. And it says here in verse 4, Elihu had waited before speaking to Job because they were older than he was. So he was kind of in this like, okay, I'm going to let the older people have the conversation and show them that respect and that honor. I'm younger, I'm going to let them go first, right? He wasn't trying to dominate or command the conversation or be equal. He was showing them that respect. And then in verse 7, he says, I thought age should speak. Advanced years should teach wisdom. So he was recognizing that those older gentlemen had age on him. They had several years, if not more. And he was recognizing that he could learn from their wisdom if he just remained quiet and listened in the conversation. He wanted to be taught. So the question I have here is, we learn from the verse that time on the earth earns honor because life lived grants wisdom. Some people are more wise than others, right? But life lived teaches you things. And my question to the panel is, what was the greatest piece of wisdom that was either passed down to you by someone older or that you had to learn the hard way yourself?
I think for me personally, there's two viewpoints I find in our generation today, and it could be within the church or it could be just in the world in general. You have the, what I'm going to call the detanglers and the demolishers. And so with the detangler, they are a person who sees the value in the mess that's in front of them. So for an example, I like to crochet, but sometimes when I'm doing that, the yarn I'm using gets all tangled up. It started out in this nice, pretty ball, and now it's like a mess. But in order to make the project I have to pull out all those knots. And I want it to be intact. Yeah, I could go in there with the scissors and just start cutting, but then I have to tie it all back together. Now my yarn has a bunch of knots in it, and the finished product that I'm going to have is going to reflect all of that in there. So when I say people that are detangling, maybe you have baggage. And let's face it, with all the generations and all the things that have happened, we all have baggage that's brought in. The relationship that my parents had is going to affect me and my relationship with my husband. The church and what it cared about and what it promoted in my youth is going to affect stuff going forward. Now, on the other side, you have the demolishers. And the demolishers just want to bulldoze through everything, tear it all the way down, even down to the foundation, and build up something else. And it's usually going to appeal to them in some sort of way to help make them feel happy and to encourage their happiness. Kind of what we were talking about with the people going from job to job to job. Well, this isn't I'm not happy anymore, so I'm going to go to this job. Demolish that, start all over again. Oh, this relationship isn't serving me anymore. They don't make me happy. Oh, I'm just going to go and find somebody else. Or maybe I'll just find myself. It's all about loving me anyway. So with these two, and this happens, like I said, sadly, within the church. What we find a lot with my generation, I see a lot of people out there who've just walked away from Christianity because they went purity culture and politics and all this stuff I was told to do, like Anna was talking about. We were told to do things with maybe not a lot of explanation why. When you ask questions, why are you asking questions? Where did you hear that? We don't have time for that. You just need to believe. And over time, what people did was they would just demolish their faith and say, well, I don't want this and I don't want that and I really don't want actually any of it. But then you had the people who were the detanglers who said, you know what, there's something here. There's something in this. I know there's truth because they've experienced it. They've experienced something with Jesus and how he changed their life. And they say, I'm going to pull these knots out. And you know what, maybe it's going to take some time, but I want that value at the end. There's something there at the end that's worth keeping. And so for me, the lesson I had to learn was to not be a demolisher because it's really easy to do that. It's really easy to say, I had a tough relationship with my parents. I had maybe a mom who was a little, trying to manipulate me. But I had to go, wait a second. Am I going to demolish that relationship and just call her toxic and she needs to go away from me, she's a narcissist? Or am I going to take the time to say, how did that happen? And do what Christ is calling us to do, which is to live with people and live out life with people. And the same thing I had to do with my faith. I told you guys, I reached a point where I was just like, this seems very like performative. And I had to go, do I want to throw this all away? Or do I want to take the time to tear out the things that aren't important so that I can find that truth and that foundation that's still there? And so for me, the thing that I had to learn the hard way was that, to be a detangler and not a demolisher. So that's something.
Excellent. Rich, what would you say was the greatest piece of wisdom that was passed down to you or that you had to learn the hard way?
Yeah, so less about the hard way, just advice that was given to me. So I'm explaining this as quick as I can for time's sake, but like just lock in for just a second, because both of these pieces of advice were given to me like as early in my career. So I didn't get it as a kid, but it's or youth or a young adult or a teenager. But if I did and I understood it, it would have made sense to me. And the first one is, early in my career, I was very focused on like, I'm getting to the top. I'm going. Like, get out of my way. I was the bulldozer. Like, I just wanted to set my family up to be successful. I had a boss pull me aside and he said, hey man, I can tell you're very ambitious. I love it. It's great for our organization, but you may be going a little extra. And I was like, help me understand. And he said, you got to have good perspective. That's the thing the older generation had. They had incredible perspective that each day is a new day. And listen, this life's going to end one day, right? Like, have the right perspective in your mind. And he said, you have to learn that you don't live to work. You work to live. And it's like, okay, that doesn't make any sense to me. And basically what he is saying is what Pastor Ron says quite often. What you do or where you work is what you do, but it's not who you are, right? And it's almost like my job defined me. And that can be the same for you, right? Like, you may be going through and you're like, well, I am a soccer superstar. Well, first thing you are is a child of God, right? That's first and foremost, right? And then you are a brother or sister. You are a son or a daughter inside your family. You are a friend to the person sitting next to you. The soccer player, the all academic, national, all that stuff falls underneath those things. And so I had to learn that in the workplace, and it's great perspective, but you can learn that now and it will carry you when you get to the workplace. Like, what you have and what you do and how good you are at things is only a portion of really who you are, right? It's not everything that's about you. The second piece of advice that was given to me, and I think this it changed my life. So Tyson is 14. When he was born, my boss's boss wrote me a letter. This is like on the verge of email, so email was coming. But he wrote me a letter and he said, this is what it's like to be a dad. It was a very encouraging letter. But in the letter, he said, don't wish your kids away. And I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. So when I came back to work, I said, what did you mean by that? And he says, don't wish your kids away. Like, he's born, don't wish he's won, or don't wish he's walking, or don't wish he had teeth. Because one day you're going to wake up and he's going to be 18 driving to college and you wish you could go all the way back. And the same applies to you guys right now, and all of us actually. Like, some of you are saying, I wish I was just in high school. I just wish I could get there. Or I wish I could be driving. I wish I was out of my parents' house. And then all that stuff happens, and guess what? You're going to say, man, I wish I can go back to when I was in like 4th grade and life wasn't so crazy, right? Like, so just be careful how quickly you want to wish things forward, because when you get there, hey, it might be cool, but you almost sometimes wish, I know for me personally, I wish I could go back to times when things were much simpler, like when we were growing up, climbing in trees and abandoned houses, right? Like, that would be great. And instead of paying my mortgage or, worrying about, putting gas in my car. Like, things are simpler when you wish you can go back. So those are two advices that were like later on I got in life, but if I understood it when I was in 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, things would be much different for me.
Excellent advice. And guys, a lot of the stuff that was shared does have biblical basis. It just wasn't always quoted as biblical basis, but it was being shared. So your Bibles are going to give you everything that you possibly need, but then you have adults in your life here and hopefully outside of here that'll be willing to help you understand more of what the things in the Bible are saying and meaning. So give it up for our panel. We are finished with part 3. X marks the spot. Thank you guys so much. And now we're going to move to our time of mentor huddle. So again, sitting under older generations to glean wisdom from them, to ask them questions, and to talk about your life and see how they're able to help you through those seasons. So find a leader of the same gender sex and head out with them. If you're in too large of a group, they're gonna break it down a little bit because we wanna keep the group small, and then we'll have about 15-ish or so minutes, 20 minutes to discuss some things, okay?